Hi, Kristen. I'm going to get started shortly. Just trying to figure out how to live stream. I might be recording. I'm just trying to check on Facebook to see if I'm actually live streaming or if it's just live in Zoom. Then we'll get going. Okay, I think I might be good. Well, either way, I will record the Zoom recording and then I'll put this on YouTube if nothing else. So welcome, welcome. I think the big question on everybody's mind is whether or not you are at higher risk for COVID-19, and that's what we're going to try to cover with this Facebook Live. I will be able to see your comments definitely in the chat. I will try to log on to Facebook towards the end of this and see if I could pull up the stream on there. Hopefully I can get to your live comments while we're going, and if not, I will double back, look at them after the video has ended, and then I'll answer them in the comments. So don't worry, I will get to them at some point. Let me go ahead and share my screen in just a second, because I'm going to do an awful lot of this in my very favorite program. Hold on. My favorite program, which is Microsoft Paint. Yes, I am an elder millennial, as we are called. So to establish the framework that we're going to talk about, we first need to talk about immunology. And even if you're not an immunologist, I think it's important to have at least a broad understanding of how the immune system works. And particularly, there's going to be an emphasis on antiviral immunity and the autoimmune piece of this, because I work with a lot of folks with autoimmunity or gut problems. Those are kind of my two big areas of expertise. And I'm seeing this come up in a lot of forums with autoimmunity as well as IBS and SIBO. The question is whether or not you are intrinsically at a higher risk of complications from COVID-19 due to pre-existing gut health issues or autoimmunity. And to frame that, we're going to talk about immunology a little bit. So here we have the wonderful program Microsoft Paint. I'm going to scoot myself over a little bit. And one of the things that comes up in the autoimmune world in particular is this idea that there's an immune seesaw or teeter-totter, depending on what you grew up calling it. And that is going to strike a balance, hopefully, between Th1, that's T helper 1 mediated immunity, versus Th2. Now, most of my patients have heard this shtick before, so bear with me. Broadly speaking, this is totally oversimplifying a complex system. Th1 immunity is going to be largely your anti-tumor and antiviral immunity. And Th2 immunity is the side of the immune system that's good at smoking out big things like parasites and worms. They also are the side responsible for creating histamine and the allergenic response. Now, with autoimmunity, there's been a lot of talk over the last couple of decades whether or not there is a skewing of this immune seesaw where one side goes up and the other side goes down. Whether it be this way or that way is very contested amongst the autoimmune crowd, and that's a topic for another day. But suffice it to say, these are two of the big arms of your immune system. Now, what I think is possibly not being talked about enough or being oversimplified is that there's a lot more to the immune system than simply these two types of Th cells. You also have Th9, let's see, there's Th1, Th2, Th3, aka the T helper cell. They're all T helpers. I'm sorry. Th3, also called Treg, sorry. There's Th9, Th17, and Th22. So even amongst these T helper cells, there's an awful lot of different ones. And in the discussion of COVID-19, our focus is probably going to be a little bit less on this. Look, where else could I make a beautiful thing like that than Microsoft Paint? Our discussion is probably less about this and more about the cytokine storm that seems to be related with Th17. Now I'm going to toggle back to myself here and I'll kind of zoom back here. Okay, so you have these two sides of the immune system. You've got Th1 and Th2 that's going to mediate how well you can smoke out the virus initially. What seems to be the problem with COVID-19 is less about those arms of the immune system, and it's more about the inflammatory cascade that gets cooking a couple of days into the infection. And that's more related to Th17. Now, Th17 and its associated chemical messengers do seem to be associated with autoimmunity, particularly if you have more aggressive form of disease in autoimmunity, there is more Th17 activity, so it seems. So theoretically, I do think that a lot of people with autoimmunity, particularly if it's severe, could be at a higher risk of COVID-19 risk or complications. Now, whether that is true for you as an individual, we'll get to in a little bit, but I wanted to frame that first. While I'm on this topic, I also wanted to mention, though, that there's discussion about the use of herbal remedies like elderberry and echinacea, and whether or not that would set you up more for a cytokine storm, and whether or not you should or shouldn't be taking these things. So for what it's worth, and I'm going to link to some herbalists that I really respect and some of their blog posts as well, the elderberry piece of it, I think, is very shaky at best. For what it's worth, elderberry has traditionally not been used so much as an elderberry syrup, but elderflower has been used more traditionally as an herbal medicine. We actually don't have a lot of good clinical data on elderberry. We have a handful of studies that suggest that it can either prevent colds and flus or shorten their duration if used in an acute setting. But other than literally like a couple of studies, we don't have a lot of good clinical evidence on elderberry. It's delicious. It seems to work. I do recommend it a lot for prevention. But as far as chugging it all season long or all year long, I don't know if I'm a big fan of that. There's one study that suggests that elderberry can increase levels of IL-6, and IL-6 is one of the inflammatory messengers that seems to be involved in the cytokine storm, particularly with COVID-19. So theoretically, if you are already inflamed and then you take elderberry and that jacks up your IL-6 a little bit more, that could be a bad thing for you. But again, we have shaky data at best whether or not elderberry does in fact do that, and if it does that across the board or in very specific circumstances. What I would say is a few things, is that hardly anybody, including myself, measures interleukin-6 on a clinical day-to-day basis. I just don't do it. It's cost prohibitive, and measuring inflammatory mediators in blood doesn't always reflect the inflammation load in the tissue, which is what I'm really trying to get at when I'm helping somebody with a specific illness. There are other ways to assess inflammation in blood work that I think are much more useful. And you could even have some of this done already. If you're a patient of mine, you darn sure have had all of this run at some point on you. But even if you haven't been a patient of mine, somebody like your primary care doctor or your GP of whatever form could have done this on you already. The couple of things I would pay closest attention to is a marker called C-reactive protein, or CRP. That comes in either a high sensitivity or a cardiac marker. Both, I think, could be used for this purpose. CRP is an inflammatory marker that's made in the liver, secondary to IL-6 elevation. So I use that as a marker not only of inflammation, but of this particular flavor of inflammation. And also, I tend to see it more as a gut-liver axis type of inflammation. So if you have an elevated C-reactive protein, anything above 1 is noteworthy in my opinion. If you go based off of LabCorp or Quest's ranges, then they would say anything above 3 or 4, or sometimes they'll use a range of 10, which is absurd. Anything above 3 typically is going to be elevated per standard lab ranges, but that is something that is very tightly associated with IL-6, and IL-6 is the cytokine that seems to be in question for the cytokine storm. So if anything, I doubt anybody on this webcast has had IL-6 measured in serum, but I bet a bunch of you have had CRP drawn in the last couple of years. That's probably your number one bet as far as assessing your inflammatory load and your particular predilection towards this type of inflammation. Beyond that, there are other ways to measure inflammation, tons even, but they all mean slightly different things. What we're looking for is markers of this particular inflammatory soup. So an example of what I think has less promise to assess your risk is a marker like homocysteine. Homocysteine is a marker of inflammation, but it has much more to do with your B vitamin metabolism and how you're recycling some of your amino acids. It doesn't, to the best of my knowledge, have any correlation with IL-6 and cytokines and immune system activation. It's more of a metabolic type of inflammation. So in my opinion, high homocysteine is probably less of a risk factor. High C-reactive protein, I do think, is going to show promise for that. I follow a lot of my colleagues on social media, and some of them have shared posts from other colleagues who are in emergency rooms and urgent care right now. And I've seen a couple of them mention that prior to the cytokine storm, lab values of C-reactive protein seem to go up in the patients with COVID. So that would make sense per that context, but that's just one, a one-off from an ER physician. I think that was in San Antonio that I saw that. So herbs, I would say we just don't have a lot of clinical data as far as herbs exacerbating IL-6 type inflammation. What I would say, the silver lining to all of this, is this particular inflammatory soup, as I call it, or this particular flavor of inflammation, this IL-6, interleukin-1 beta, nasty cytokine storm business, for all that it is not a good type of inflammation to have if you were going to pick one, it is outrageously well researched. The cellular machinery that turns on this type of inflammation is very well understood and very well researched. So if you look up natural compounds that are anti-inflammatory, quote unquote, almost all of them will have some research involving interleukin-6, C-reactive protein, or something called STAT3, which is the gene gene activator that turns on IL-6 production. And if you can inhibit one of those, you're basically inhibiting the same thing, and that should put you in a better position for the cytokine storm. And if you think about it, resveratrol, I will link in the doobly-doo below on YouTube/Facebook. I found one article not specific to COVID, but I found one article looking at the cytokine storm, particularly, I believe it was for the flu, and they documented that turmeric, shocker, but like one of the big anti-inflammatories everybody's talking about, turmeric suppresses the cytokine storm and can be useful for the influenza cytokine storm. So stands to reason it would be useful for this cytokine storm as well. So things like turmeric, resveratrol, green tea, boswellia, heck, even fish oil. A lot of the traditional anti-inflammatory things that you would have gotten from a functional medicine provider or an herbalist probably have some impact on this particular type of cytokine storm. So that's the good news. The bad news is that this type of inflammation really sucks and it could kill you with COVID-19. the good news is that we know that it sucks, and we've known it for many, many years. And the thing that that has done is it's given us a lot of research. So any of these anti-inflammatory compounds, I will list some of my favorites, but turmeric, resveratrol, green tea, fish oil kind of top out the list as far as I'm concerned. And then everything else beyond that is kind of gravy. So those are the big things as far as suppressing that cytokine storm from an herbal medicine perspective. I did see an article, which I will also link, that vitamin D could be used to reduce the risk of infection and death from COVID-19, which, oh, I see that I've got one question. I'll get to the questions in just a minute. I did see that. I would say the vitamin D association, I recommend vitamin D practically for everybody through cold and flu season anyway. I do think vitamin D is going to show to be protective against COVID-19. There's mixed reviews as far as as far as influenza, pneumonia, and vitamin D. The biggest area where I've seen that research lacking is that they frequently don't dose vitamin D appropriately. So in studies, if they actually look at people's serum levels and try to get them up to a respectable level, or if they do a high enough dose that it'll just get everybody up to a respectable level, vitamin D does show promise for influenza and pneumonia risk, and it'll probably do the same for COVID. The key is that most people need at least 2,000 IUs of vitamin D per day, every day, preferably with a fat-containing meal because it's fat soluble. A lot of people do really well on 5,000. I'm one of those people, I typically start people at 5,000 and then I adjust up or down if I need to based on lab values. But even if you haven't had vitamin D tested in the last year, you will probably tolerate 2,000 IUs of D marvelously. And there's very, very little risk with vitamin D for 99% of people. So vitamin D, I think, also makes the list as far as I'm concerned. And then I also found an article more recently that I shared on my Instagram account and then cross-posted to Facebook, that there was a research article hypothesizing that melatonin might be useful for COVID. Now, the reason being is that not only, hold on, let me see if I can share my screen again. Share screen. Okay, so going back to this lovely doodle that I created for you guys, like I said before, Th1 immunity is really the side of the immune system that is in charge of antiviral immunity more than anything else. Th2 less so. When your seesaw is skewed in favor of Th2, in favor of the allergenic and histaminic response, you're probably in less of a position to fight your viruses efficiently. Melatonin, in addition to being a really potent anti-inflammatory and, side note, prokinetic for all of you SIBO people, it is also a pretty potent Th1 promoter. So if you are taking melatonin, you get the nice added benefit of it being an anti-inflammatory, which is good for the cytokine storm potentially, and it increases your antiviral Th1 immunity. So I think melatonin is probably going to show a lot of promise. Now, because I said that, and because this study just came out in the last week or so, melatonin's probably going to fly off the damn shelf. So people like me who take it more regularly are going to see a shortage. But melatonin, if you tolerate it well, could be really useful. The only thing that melatonin really does that I've noticed is it'll give people really funky, vivid dreams. So if you're one of those people, then melatonin is probably not the best bet for you, and you're better off going with something like turmeric or resveratrol or green tea. But as long as you tolerate melatonin well, that is something that you could have in addition to everything else. And then the, kind of the given coming from a nutritional therapy practitioner and what I do is to try to continue to eat as healthy as you can, even amongst all of the craziness, and the grocery shopping is a nightmare, I know. Frozen fruits and vegetables have become kind of a mainstay in our household, at least, as well as just going out about weekly to get fresh. But trying to get as many fruits and vegetables, keeping your microbiome healthy and as diverse as possible with plant foods and fiber is going to be really key. And also that'll ensure that you're hopefully getting adequate levels of selenium, zinc, vitamin C, etc. You could certainly run out and try to find the last remaining bottles of vitamin C and zinc and selenium, or you could just get as many fruits and vegetables in your system as humanly possible, and then maybe take a multivitamin on top of that. Depending on the multivitamin, a lot of them do have fairly robust amounts of zinc and selenium in them, so I don't know if I would recommend taking extra for most people. I think just a multi will cover that base. Let me scroll back up. I had a couple of topics I wanted to really make sure I hit. All right, I bored you with Immunology 101, cytokines. I think autoimmunity has the potential to be a risk factor. In addition to, the CDC has posted a list, and I like that too, of conditions that put you at higher risk, like asthma, chronic lung disease, diabetes, obesity. Liver disease actually made the list, I noticed. So there's a myriad of chronic diseases that put you at a higher risk automatically. But I do think that autoimmunity broadly, we're probably going to find that that makes the list in some way at some point. Another one that I actually wanted to touch on, I stumbled on this article a couple of weeks ago, right at the beginning of the COVID madness, particularly low T3 levels. So now we're jumping into thyroid world. Low T3 levels, or what is called euthyroid 6 syndrome, where your TSH and T4 are possibly normal, but your T3 is low. That does have a little bit of research being associated with worse outcomes in situations of, I believe it was hospital-acquired pneumonia. And I will post a link to that. I don't want to fearmonger or get people worried over nothing, but if your T3 levels are low or on the lower side of normal, that may or may not bode well for you as far as COVID risk also. It's hard to say. This was, again, in a pneumonia research article. It was a couple of years old, probably 2017, I think. But I thought that that was noteworthy anyway. So your thyroid might also play a role in how you recover from COVID and the cytokine storm, although that was not specifically mentioned in that article. Let me look. Okay. I think that's a lot of what I wanted to cover. And then to circle back to the gut health piece of the conversation, what I've seen a lot too is people asking, again, am I at higher risk automatically because of IBS or SIBO or autoimmunity? So autoimmunity, I've already answered. I think that there's a solid maybe leading towards yes for a lot of autoimmune people, unless you're in remission. If your autoimmunity is well controlled or in remission, then you're probably at no higher risk than your average Joe. But if you have autoimmunity that is still running bonkers, then yes, you're probably at a higher risk. You could try to assess that more accurately with something like C-reactive protein, possibly inflammatory markers like elevated ferritin or other acute phase reactant type markers could be useful in the situation. But I think C-reactive protein is really going to be the most commonly used and best way to assess that. Now, for IBS and SIBO folk, I don't know if I'm convinced that you guys are going to be at a higher risk intrinsically because of the pre-existing condition of IBS or SIBO. I don't know if I'm going to go with that. I think that you guys are probably at average risk, with the caveat, a lot of people with autoimmunity also have IBS or SIBO, and it goes both ways. So if you have SIBO and autoimmunity, then you're going to default to the conversation we had about autoimmunity. If you have post-infectious IBS, if you have the SIBO that is inherently autoimmune, and it's your immune system attacking your nerve endings that's destroying your MMC, that's a variant of autoimmunity, and you would be more in the camp with autoimmune people in that circumstance. But if you have SIBO for an unknown reason, or you developed SIBO secondary to PPI use, or adhesions, or something else, unrelated to food poisoning and the autoimmunity, then I don't know if you're intrinsically going to be at a higher risk. What I would say with SIBO and IBS is a couple of things, is that you guys are going to be at a higher risk of malabsorption. So making extra super double mega sure that you're getting all of your nutrients from food and covering your bases with a multivitamin, I think is going to very much behoove you. Getting, a normal person theoretically could get by with just 100% of your daily value of zinc. Maybe you want to get 120% to kind of make up for any sort of malabsorption that you may or may not have because of the SIBO. Your microbiome does very much influence the immune system. That's kind of the shtick that functional medicine and naturopathic medicine has been saying for a lot of years. How it will affect COVID outcomes is hard to say. What I would say is that you could probably use your body's tendencies and your history to your aid in this case. I always ask my patients, is your immune system strong? Or are you the kind of person who somebody could sneeze in your face and you're not going to get sick? Or are you the person where one person 5 cubicles away gets a cold and you automatically know you're going to get it because your immune system sucks that bad? If you are in the latter category, then you're probably at a higher risk of catching COVID because it's a viral infection, just like anything else. If you're at a higher risk seemingly to catch a cold or flu, then that probably will stand true with COVID. Likewise, knowing your immune system, when you get inflamed, do you get super inflamed or does your body seem to regulate at least somewhat? Like, are you a person who needs to go hit the steroids or get a prescription medication to take down inflammation? Or are you good if you just rest and hydrate for a couple of days and your body naturally seems to recover? If you are a person for whom you need that prescription intervention and your body goes just all in when it gets inflamed, or if you get really aggressive autoimmune flares, that probably means that your ability to ramp up those inflammatory cytokines is exaggerated compared to the average Joe, and that could put you at a higher risk. If you, on the other hand, are a person who you get inflamed and then you bounce back within a couple of days and you just need to like rest and hydrate and maybe sip on some tea for a few days, then I don't know if I would necessarily think you're at a higher risk. I think IBS and SIBO could go both ways depending on what's going on. Now, IBD, which I also work with, IBD is automatically lumped in with the autoimmune folk. So that's going to kind of default back to our autoimmune conversation. Let's see. All right. So let me try to answer questions now because I feel like I've talked a lot. All right. Hold that thought for 1 second. I'm going to try to pull up the Facebook Live. I'll check there and then I'll pull up Zoom. And like I said, if for some reason I can't get the technology to cooperate, if there's user error on my part, then I will just read the comments later and answer them as they come up. Okay, I can't figure out how. It's telling me that I am live, so that's good. But I can't figure out how to see the questions as they appear. So I clearly have more learning to do on that front. I do have one on Zoom. Kristen asked, what do you think about astaxanthin supplements? I don't have a lot of experience with it, honestly. It's not as well researched of a compound as turmeric or resveratrol or green tea or fish oil. So as far as like picking out things in a hierarchy, I would probably reach for those first. It does have anti-inflammatory effects. I believe it has an antihistaminic effect, if I remember correctly. I just don't really have any real experience with it as a nutraceutical. So I'm sorry I can't offer more of an opinion on that one. I might do a quick PubMed dive and get back to you though, and I'll put it on the Facebook live feed and I'll let you know if my opinion changes. But I think as far as herbal medicines and anti-inflammatories, I think those four would round out my top four. Fish oil, which I think most people should take just indefinitely, probably. Vitamin D you could also lump in as an anti-inflammatory, and obviously it's a vitamin in and of itself. Turmeric, resveratrol, green tea, I think all of those are probably going to beat out most other supplements. And if you can get them in a cocktail or combine them, then they seem to have a synergistic effect. Oh, sulforaphane, that is another one, my God. It's a little hard to source right now. Jarro's been on back order for a little while, and I think they just got it back in, but there is a antioxidant from broccoli seed. You could either get the broccoli seeds and grow them yourself, which I encourage most of my patients to do, or you could do a product like Brocomax or some sort of sulforaphane supplement, and that does have beneficial effects and anti-inflammatory effects for your microbiota as well as your immune system, and it is a STAT3 IL-6 inhibitor, so that is also a very useful one in the same category of usefulness as turmeric and resveratrol. I've got another question. What brand of vitamin D? There's a lot. I tend to recommend Designs for Health. They have a nice product that has vitamin D with a little bit of K2 thrown in, which I do think is important. There's also an orthomolecular product I use called K-Force, and that has a bit higher of a dose of K. So for my people who have osteoporosis or lots of cavities and I'm suspicious that they have a vitamin K deficiency, I'll usually use K-Force for somebody who doesn't have overt signs of K deficiency, and I'm not super, super worried about it, but I want to just have that insurance policy, I'll usually use Designs for Health. I think they just call it vitamin D Supreme, if I remember correctly, but I could double check that. If I'm incorrect, I'll let you know. Okay. Well, I wasn't sure if I'd be able to fill up a whole webcast on COVID because I'm not an immunologist. I'm not a COVID expert by any stretch of the imagination, but I wanted to at least put out some information and answer questions since I've seen this pop up in so many of the autoimmune and SIBO forums lately. So as I think of things, I will probably comment on this thread and let you know as I chew on this more. Let's see, I've got another one. Are these recommended additionally to the multis? Yeah, so I would say your multivitamin, you're going to want to do just indefinitely, in my opinion. I think most people would do well on a daily multivitamin just to cover your bases. And that's going to make sure that you're getting adequate levels of vitamin C, zinc, selenium, etc. Usually multis are pretty lacking as far as magnesium and calcium, but most other nutrients they do okay on. The vitamin D would be an addition because multivitamins typically only have like 400 IUs, which is a total wuss dose. You really need 2,000 minimum for most viral infections, maybe even 5 for a lot of people. Christine, hi Christine. Yes, I do have the DK in my office if you want to orchestrate a time where we can do a pickup and you don't have to come in contact with me with my cooties. I'll just wave at you from my back office. How about that? But yeah, so multivitamin, I think multivitamin and fish oil, everybody should already be on those anyway. If you're not, go ahead and start. For multis, there's a lot of them that I like. I tend to be pretty choosy because I work with people with complex conditions. Thorne has a good one. I really like the Seeking Health products also, and I carry a lot of their multivitamins in my office depending on what I'm going for. So everybody should be on a multivitamin and a fish oil probably. For fish oil, I really like Nordic Naturals. They don't smell fishy. They don't have fishy weird burps. They are the triglyceride form of the fish oil, and that seems to be absorbed better, and they're purity tested out the wazoo, so there's no metals or weird stuff in them. So Nordic Naturals is definitely worth the increased premium price for them. The multivitamin, there's many that are good, but I really like Seeking Health. That's probably the one that I use the most of, is one of their products. And then the anti-inflammatories on an as-need basis. If you're at an average risk and you have a run-of-the-mill case of SIBO that's not due to autoimmunity and you're not suspicious that you have autoimmunity, then I don't know if I would run out and tank the shelves of their turmeric. It's kind of like the toilet paper, right? Like if all of us run out and get toilet paper when we don't actually need it yet, then the people who really need it aren't going to have access to it. So I don't want people to run out and immediately buy out all of the sulforaphane, resveratrol, turmeric, and green tea. But from a food-based standpoint, throw some turmeric in your food. And my husband, bless his soul, he just put turmeric in his coffee the other day because Joe Rogan does. It was the cutest thing ever. Hi, Mike, if you're watching. So, you could sneak turmeric in just about anything. Heck, you could even just mix turmeric with a little bit of coconut oil, make it into a paste, and then just take it down like a champ. Get it done and over with, and then you get a pretty high dose with the fat that'll help it get absorbed. Resveratrol, you officially have my blessing to have 1 or 2 glasses of red wine per week. I think that's reasonable. If you want to supplement beyond that, that's gravy. And then green tea, there's a lot of reputable types of green tea. Try to get organic if you can. Trader Joe's green tea, I think, tested pretty well on purity testing. So that could be a good one that's accessible to most people. But having a few cups of green tea a day also wouldn't be a bad idea. And it's food-based and it's pretty cheap. So that I think that's going to cover the basis for most everybody. And with that, I think we're going to wrap up. And like I said, I will look at the questions as they come up on the Facebook Live once it posts, and the YouTube video. I'm going to just share this directly on YouTube. So once this posts on YouTube, I will monitor comments on both Facebook and YouTube. Let me know if you have questions, and I will share a couple of those links that I promised in both of the descriptions. And I'm also going to link to an article that a herbalist friend of mine shared, and it's just so thorough and such a breath of fresh air. I really highly recommend. I recommend his book. He has a book on Amazon and elsewhere. He has a marvelous herb school, and if you want to do a consult with one of his herbalist students, I highly recommend that. And this article in particular is really useful, so go check out Thomas's stuff. I'm going to link to that. It's the Eclectic School of Herbal Medicine, and he has an article about COVID-19 where he gives other ideas for herbal strategies and some of his non-bullshitty advice, which is great. And I meant to contrast that, not that he has bullshit advice normally, just like the internet in general. It's refreshing when somebody's not BSing you. So I'm going to link to Thomas's article, and I will put other goodies in the doobly-doo as I think of them. But thank you all for joining me. Hopefully that helped you understand whether or not you're truly at an increased risk of COVID-19. In the meantime, keep washing your hands, stay far away from everybody and their cooties, and I'll see you in another video at some point, I'm sure. Take care.